morning. I didn't provide any answers for you yesterday, and I do want you to know we're going to work through these verses in Romans 7:14 through 25. I'll work through them, and the parent view is going to be a very loosely held view, and I will work through them with the view that the I is Paul as a believer. However, I am, I would say, maybe 60% convinced that that's the case. I do see the value, and I can see a very logical interpretation of him as an unbeliever. And so I'm just not 100% sure, and I don't want to act like I am. But let's work through it, and we'll see some of the issues as they surface, and we'll talk about them. For now, we're just going to look at verses 14 and 15 this morning. For we know that the law is spiritual, but I am of the flesh. Remember, he's established that the law is good, but he sees something in him that's not. Sold under sin. If we stop there, we would say this is clearly an unbeliever. The language of sold under sin sure sounds like Romans 6. Verse 15 comes along, though, and kind of makes it a little more challenging. For I do not understand my own actions. For I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. Well, there's none righteous, no, not one. There's none that seek after God, Romans 3 tells us. So we have these two kind of pieces, right? Sold under sin seems like an identification of somebody who is not a believer. And yet, to be able to say that I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate, would seem that the heart's been changed so that you actually hate doing things that are unrighteous. And you don't want to do things that are unrighteousness. That sounds like a believer. You can see immediately the tension points as we work through this. Now, just a little side note for you. Be gracious with people who disagree on an interpretation like this. I actually want you to see that I read verse 14 and it looks like an unregenerate person, and I read verse 15 and we go, well, wait a minute, maybe it's a regenerate person. And I want you to see the tensions there, because we have to be careful about holding things with excessive dogmatism. Because we also can make arguments for both to fit the larger arguments of Paul. Perhaps Paul here, it seems like he's built up talking about what it is to live the spiritual life, and so he is identifying with the tensions of trying to be righteous, and he wants us to get into chapter 8 and see how to live the kind of life that is a life of victory. Or perhaps Paul is simply showing and burrowing down further on the idea of captivity to sin, and therefore it further extols the liberation that is articulated in chapter 8. You can make arguments for either. For now, what I want you to see is that conflict emerges in us as people. We'll see this accentuated. Conflict emerges in us as people because we're in a spiritual war. And we'll talk more about that. But for now, maybe an application this morning is, hey, just give some interpretive grace to one another on difficult subjects. Take care.